Welcome back to another Wheel of Reads video. I'm going to do another how-to on podcasting. So, as I mentioned last time, we're going to this time be talking about formatting your podcast. So, last episode, we talked about how to pick a topic, what you should be talking about on your podcast or what you should not, and just some tips on best practices on picking topics that best suits you. So, now that you got a topic in hand, how are you going to do your podcast? So today we're going to talk about like how many hosts you want to have. Also talk about how you should set up your podcast. If you want to have an interview set up or a episodic or topical, or even if you want to have guests on. So we're kind of going through some of the pros and cons. This should be a pretty short video, but just wanted to kind of lay out some of the things that I found and stuff that works for us, things that we've seen other people do that have worked for them, and kind of go from there. So let's first talk about hosts. So a lot of this depends on your topic. If you're going to be doing something like interviews, for example, like a Joe Rogan, of course, he's by himself. That might be just a single host and you just have lots of guests. That's okay. That might be a format that you do depending on what your topic is. It might be that some of your episodes are interviews. And this is not like all your episodes have to be this one thing. It's just these are the different types of podcasts I've seen out there. Secondly, it could be episodic. That's what we are. We have episodes. And so we follow along a book in a read along. So it's episode by episode. This doesn't necessarily have to be a read along or a watch along. If you're talking about a TV show or different movies and things like that, it can be something like telling your own story or telling another person's story, such as true crime ones, or even people that come up with fiction and do storytelling. A lot of times it is someone by themselves when they do the true crime stuff. Occasionally you'll have two people bantering back and forth. And then there's the topical approach. Oftentimes I've seen with topical more than one host. So you're picking different topics and going through it. It might be over one particular topic. Like for us, we do the Wheel of Time. So you might have a podcast that just does different topics within the Wheel of Time, and they're not necessarily one episode after the other that flow together. And they might be something completely separate, standalone. So you can kind of pick and play wherever you want. So let's kind of go through the pros and cons. I'll start with the hosting first. So single host, just by yourself. Let's talk about that. So some of the pros. One, you can do everything on your own time. You are the only person you have to worry about. So it's just your own time management. But pick your time. You don't have to worry about anybody else's schedules. Scheduling is extremely easy when you're by yourself. Well, unless you're really busy, but that's your own personal problem, not someone else's. Secondly, it's really easy to edit. You can do single tracks. There's lots of editors that will record everything on one single track. If you have multiple people, that might not be the best way to do single track recording. I'll get into that in a different episode or different video where I'll talk about different editing software and editing tips. But yeah, editing is a lot easier with one person. So you just pretty much trim, cut, and you're good to go. Some of the things that might be difficulties or challenges with one person. One is creativity, especially if you're doing like topical, trying to come up with enough things to talk about by yourself. Oftentimes you can brainstorm and you have a co-host that might make it easier. It's less banter too, unless you're talking to yourself. You have no one to banter with. So that's okay. Like I said, it just depends on your topic and what you're doing your podcast on. Another thing is you have to have a big personality. If you're by yourself, you have no one else to rely on but yourself. If you're just dragging onto the mic like this and talking, probably not going to be the most dynamic. Probably wondering why you're not getting listeners. If I'm going to sleep listening to you, probably everyone else is too. So dynamic. And you could be a monotone person. That's okay. I would recommend you have a co-host. That might bring you out a little of your shell a little bit. Or might be someone that compliments you well. Someone that's crazy and you're more conservative and more calm, and they might be the crazy one. That adds for a nice, fun dynamic. So let's get into two hosts, double host. You see this a lot. That's probably the most common for a lot of podcasts I listen to have two hosts. Once again, easier than scheduling than more than two. You only have two people you have to worry about. But once again, that's some of the benefits. Another plus is lots of ideas. You get the banter, as I mentioned before. You'll get to talk back and forth and kind of feed off each other. So that can be a really fun dynamic. Some of the things that might make it challenging, like I said, scheduling. Whenever you're adding more hosts, scheduling becomes tough, more and more hard. Yeah. And then editing. I'll get more into that in my video or my later video. Like I said, when you're editing with more than one person, you might sometimes get the dreaded audio drift where the tracks don't link up. And if you're doing single track recording, this can be devastating for a podcast. You can have late reactions and there's no way to fix it. So you say something and 5 seconds later they laugh, or even worse, you say something and they start talking over you because the tracks are actually recording at different speeds. So if you have two hosts in the same room, that problem's not going to be there. But if you're both recording remotely, that can be an issue. So we'll talk more about that with software later. But just to keep that in mind, if you have more than one host, we're going to have to try more editing. There's going to be things like normalizing sound levels. One person might be talking really close to the microphone. Another person might be really far away. And that's going to be jarring when you actually edit your podcast and put it out there. So there's different tools you can do to fix that. So I'll teach you that later. So come back later for another video and we'll talk all about those things. Now let's go to 3. That's what we have. We have 3 hosts. Things get a little more difficult when you have 3. Scheduling gets increasingly harder because now you have 3 people schedule you're all trying to put together. Editing becomes even more difficult because now you have all sorts of different volumes, all sorts of different problems, and maybe even tracks being not meshed together right. So lots more editing. But the plus side is the banter gets even more dynamic with 3 people, and you get to feed off each other in an even more symbiotic way. Plus, lots more ideas, especially if you're doing topical. I'm thinking of one podcast. For example, the Black Tower podcast, they have 3 co-hosts and they're a topical podcast. So they're able to brainstorm together and come up with a whole lot of ideas and a whole lot of different topics to cover. So might not be a bad idea to have 3. I will caution you to go over that number. And here's why. Microphone control. Just like crowd control, when you're recording with lots of people, it gets tough, more and more hard to keep everyone from talking over each other. And then trying to get everybody's points in. Because sometimes someone will want something to say and 2 people will be going at it, or even 3, and the 4th person's just sitting on the side waiting for their turn to talk. By the time they get to talk, then you might have moved on to something else and now it just doesn't fit right and you've lost that topic. It's similar to when you're at a party. The more and more people you try to talk within one group all at once, it gets really, really tough. So if you're going to have a lot of people on, having microphone control or having visual cues, sometimes recorded with a video, might be a good idea. So you can raise hands, do visual cues. I know a lot of different these editing things have the ability to push a button and raise a virtual hand, things like that. We'll talk about all that, but I would caution going too many more. I mean, it's okay if you have 4. You get to 5 or 6 people record at the same time, unless it's the occasional guest or something like that. It gets chaotic really fast. It's like being at a party and you have a bunch of people all talking to each other at once. What ends up happening when that happens at a party is 2 people usually branch off and start having their own side conversation, maybe a 3rd person listening in, and the other 2 people branch off and have their own conversation. And that naturally happens in a social setting. But when you're all on mics, forced to talk about one thing, it can be bad. So I've never heard of a podcast going 5 people for hosts, but not saying it can't be done. And go ahead and leave a comment below if you know a good one that has tons of hosts. It might have rotating hosts, and that's fine too. But you definitely have to have some discipline if you're going to go that big. And now that I think about it, going back, maybe I think there was like a D&D. I'm not even a Dungeons and Dragons fan, but I think there was a D&D podcast that had a bunch of people because they're playing the game. But then it's turn-based, and it's very organized how they're going about it. So it might work in some types of scenarios if you're going to be round robin and you have a laid out order, that might work for you. But just some caution there. If you're going to be picking hosts, take your time. The other thing about hosts too, it's like a relationship, and I've seen more podcasts fall apart because a host leaves. Just like any relationship, they don't always last. That's really, really difficult. And especially once you start monetizing and getting money involved, I've seen that pull apart podcasts because who gets paid, how much you get paid. I'm doing more work. No, I'm doing more work. I should get compensated more. Bickering like that, just in general, ideas you might bicker on. It's like being in a relationship, and it's important to kind of lay out those roles in what your role is in the podcast beforehand. If you have one person guiding it and the other two are just kind of collaborators versus having you all collaborating, just get the communication going will be key to having multiple hosts. I've seen husbands, wives do podcasts several times, or boyfriend, girlfriends, and those tend to work out really well, often recording in the same room, and usually they're on more of the same page than a bunch of friends are, better yet, strangers. I've seen also that be disastrous and also work out. So, it's one of those things where take your time to pick your host, make sure it's the right fit, make sure it complements the other person well. If everyone's chaotic, it might be too much. If everyone's too monotone, it might be not enough. So, just word of the wise. If you're going to do more than one host, take your time, do it right, think about it, plan, communicate. Let's move on to the different types. So you have the interview podcast. The most popular one is Joe Rogan. He's, I think, the most popular podcaster out there to this day. It's one of those things people don't realize, that he used to make people eat roaches and weird stuff, and he had hair. Yeah. Did everybody watch Fear Factor? That was Joe Rogan. Anyway, now he does a podcast, and it's pretty popular. And he just brings in people and interviews them, kind of like a radio talk show, interviewing famous people and asking some off-the-wall questions and things like that. That can be good. One thing I would say about that, and I'll get to when I talk about the guest portion of this video. We'll talk about some challenges there when I get there. But think about it. If you're going to do that, make sure you find people that are willing to come on as guests. Make sure you're organized, and make sure you've pre-scripted a ton of questions. There's nothing worse than coming onto someone else's podcast and they're not prepared and it's just dead silence. I know it can be edited out, but it makes the guest really comfortable and probably doesn't want to come back ever again. Yeah, I wouldn't. So with that being said, keep that in mind. If you're going to interview, be good at it, do your research, and have a lot of ammunition ready. Next is episodic. It's what we do. It's probably the easiest way to do it, unless you're creating your own story, which I think it's its own challenge. Trying to create your own story. It's like being a writer. Everybody thinks they can write until they start trying to write and realize, man, I can't write. It's like drawing pictures or being any kind of art out there. Some people are really good at it. Don't take me wrong. I mean, you might be a natural at it. I'm not. I've tried writing my own book for years, and I think I've gotten the first chapter down and rewrote it a ton of times, and I like it now. That's one chapter. It took me 10 years to write one chapter. I probably never finish this book. But with that being said, episodic. So if we're going to do episode by episode and one leads into another, like you're doing true crime, you're telling a story, those are really popular. A lot of times those are done with, like you said, by yourself. And that's a really cool way of doing a podcast. With those, you usually have an end date, so keep that in mind how long you want your podcast to run and before it gets too stale. For us, we're running 2 books, so we know we have an end date. It's done at this point, 5.5 years from now is when we'll be done. So we have a start and finish. After that, who knows what we'll do. But then that's going to be the end of the particular run of that podcast. That's the episodic thing. You can also do topical. So topical is like when you're picking different topics. So let's say you want to do a podcast on sports. So we're going to talk about sports betting. Then we'll talk about baseball. Then we'll talk about football. Then hockey. Then we'll talk about Olympics because it's going on around now. So you're talking about different topics, everything like that. The problem is a lot of times people run out of things to talk about, and you end up having these long lulls between your episodes because you can't think of anything else to talk about. Sometimes your topics will be, there'll always be something to talk about. Like I mentioned, sports. Sports will always be happening for the most part. If you're talking about just general books in general, the books will always be there. So they'll, probably last forever. But if you're talking about one particular book, that's the only book that's ever been written, your favorite book in the entire world, I don't know. Let's pick a random book. Pride and Prejudice. I want to do an entire podcast on Pride and Prejudice and talk about all the topics I can talk about Pride and Prejudice. I guarantee I'm going to run out of things to talk about because there's nothing new coming out. So either I'm going to expand and talk about, women writers, or maybe talk about, Jane Austen and all her works. And that's still limited, but, that's something you can broaden out there, or maybe talk about, different types of romantic novels and who knows, but that is something that you could implement and expand off of one initial topic. But I say don't pigeonhole yourself until you get 3 episodes in and like, I don't have anything else to talk about anymore. That's where multiple hosts might be helpful, or also picking maybe a broader overall topic to do topical podcasts on. So let's get finally to guests. Guests can be some of the hardest things to do. So one, it's tough to get good guests. And I love having guests on our podcast. Have all our guests been great? Yes, actually, they all have. So it's in their own right, they have. Have they all been equally awesome? No. I mean, some have definitely struggled more than others because they're just not used to this format. And that's, and you never know till they come on if that's going to be the case. I would definitely try to stay away from, I'm going to get a bunch of famous people to come on the podcast, unless you're already a popular podcast and have the in scoop. That's really, really tough to do. If you're say, I'm going to slide into the DMs of all these celebrities and try to get on the podcast. Let me tell you a little secret in the industry. Most of them don't monitor their own social media. They have a marketing agency and an agent that is doing that for them. They might be able to put out their own tweets and Facebook messages and Instagram posts. But as far as who's monitoring their DMs, they might do it. Are they going to respond to you? Probably not. And if you ask them to come on your podcast, especially if you're new and you have no following, the answer is probably going to be no, or just no answer at all. So if you're banking that on being your podcast format, might not be, unless you know someone. And that's where the caveat is. I mean, obviously, if you have the inside scoop on the industry, your brother is the general manager of the Boston Red Sox, and you're going to start interviewing Boston Red Sox players, and he can just go inside the dugout and say, hey, you're on with my brother-in-law next week. Go for it, by all means. That's awesome. But obviously that's not the average person starting their podcast. So then if you're not getting celebrities, who else can you get? You can get other content creators. That's probably the easiest one. They're used to doing podcasts or YouTubes already. And with that being said, they're usually very, very open to pitching their content and being on someone else's and having that blend. Almost all of our guests have been that, other content creators within the Wheel of Time space. We know that they know the topic. It just helps out and makes it for really dynamic talking. Now, have we reached out and tried to get some of the actors from the Wheel of Time TV show? No. Have other podcasts done it successfully? Yes. Talker and Riyadh had Jennifer Garcia, John on their podcast. So, and they could probably talk to you to their blue in the face about how they went about doing it. But just a little tip, they went through their agent to get them. So it's a little bit different. Not as easy. And yeah, don't think it's one of those things, the lightning just struck the right way. And they even tell you that they probably couldn't get another one if they tried. So it's just one of those things that's really tough to do if that's going to be your format. Other content creators, great way to start. I would say be really careful about who you choose to bring on your podcast. If you're just trying to find extremely large podcasters and YouTubers to bring on, it might come across as I'm trying to gain and not, and doing this for my own self-gain and not just for fun. And that can come across the wrong way. You just have to be really careful about and build rapport the right ways. We've liked to do a good mix of content creators that are small and up and coming or smaller than us, and then ones that are larger than us, just to kind of have a mix in there, but not just focus on having all the big names and just trying to ride on their coattails. That's not what we're trying to do. And really, we looked at personalities and asked our fans who they wanted to have on. That's been a big portion of who we ask, is who our listeners also listen to and would like us to collab with. So, getting feedback from your fans. And I'll talk about it later, how do you interact with fans. That's a whole nother video as well. One thing I would caution against is the guy down the street being a guest, unless he's an expert on something, or unless he's really dynamic and adds something to your podcast. I used to always say, hey, there's several different ways that I will come on your podcaster on your show. If you ask me, almost everyone I'll say yes to, but I always kind of go through this whole entire questioning line in my head before I say yes to anyone. So one, does it benefit me? Does it benefit the community? Does it actually raise money for my podcast? Does it benefit a charity? I mean, if you're doing it for a charitable cause, the answer is probably going to be yes from me, especially if it's good charity, and one I'm fully behind. And then, do I like you? Is it going to be fun? You don't have to be the biggest so someone can come to me and have 5 listeners. But we talk offline on a voice channel or something like that somewhere. And I realize this guy's a lot of fun and I want to be on his podcast. Is it going to make me any money? Probably not. Is it going to give me listeners? Probably not. Do I still want to go hang out with him and be on his podcast? Yeah, because we've now clicked and I have that rapport, and that's okay. So those are kind of my big thing. Now, if the answer is no to all those things, like it's not going to be fun. It's not that I don't like you, but it's not. It's if I feel like it's not the kind of content that I would even listen to, if that makes sense. Not fun. Not the content to listen to. Not going to benefit me because you don't have a listenership yet. And it's all just for your gain and it's not for a charity. I'm probably going to say no, just because I am busy. I do YouTube and a podcast and have a family and have a full-time job. I've over 40, I work 60 hours a week in my regular job and then have young children and a home and chores and responsibilities. And then I do YouTube and podcast and all these other things. And I race sailboats if you don't watch the rest of the videos, and I'm busy. So it's not that I'm trying to be rude. It's just that if I'm not going to have fun doing it, I don't want to do it. So I hate to say it that way. And that's a lot of podcasters out there and a lot of YouTubers out there. If they're not going to have fun, they might say no, and don't take offense to it. It's just one of those things that a lot of us are busy people. It's not that we have a ton of spare time to do all these other things. It's just that we really enjoy doing it and we like to have fun. And that's why a lot of us do this, is because it's fun. But if we're going to go on something that's not fun, I don't want to do it. I'll probably, say no. Especially if I've seen other ones, like I'm using as an example. If I know the thing is it's a gag type thing and I'm just going to go on there and be made fun of or something like that, which I've never seen that happen in a podcast, but I'm sure there's comedy type stuff out there, like a radio show that gets people on, for chucks and giggles and stuff like that. I'm going to research you first. I'm going to listen to some of your episodes. And if that's the kind of format you have, the answer is going to be, probably just ignore. So, just keep that in mind. If I'm in on the joke, sure. Or if it's going to be beneficial, sure. But if I don't know you and you're just going to poke at me, no, I'm not going to come on your podcast or YouTube channel or anything for that matter. So keep that in mind when you're formatting, trying to figure out what you're going to do. Like I said, guests are really tough. And don't be discouraged when someone ignores you or says no. A lot of times it is because they're busy. It might not be because they don't like you. It might be just because they are extremely busy. I have a good rapport with a lot of content creators, and I will send them a DM about something, and it might be 3 weeks before they respond to me or even never respond to me. And I don't take offense to it because I know they're all busy, and I don't think, no, they don't like me because they don't respond to me. A lot of them eventually do. Some of them never do, and that's okay. Doing this, you got to have a little bit of thick skin. Otherwise, you're going to get really discouraged really fast. If you think you're going to come out of the gate and get thousands of followers day one, you're probably going about this the wrong way unless you got like some secret that I don't know about. And then let me know in the comments so I can try it. But it's going to be a lot of just repetitive marketing, and to build a podcast. And if you're going to try to ride on people's coattails, it's going to be tough if that's your model. So that's kind of the word for the wise. Don't rely on other people. Just pull yourself out of your bootstraps and make a great podcast. Yay. So I hope this was informal. I hope it didn't come off as too much of a mean or anything like that. I was just trying to be brutally honest and let you know kind of what I see happen in the community and let you know it happens to me as well. I think some people don't like me, and that's okay if people don't like me. I don't have to be liked by everyone. Some people won't like your work. That's okay. And that's like that everywhere. I can think of my favorite movies, and if I post on Twitter or Facebook or anywhere, this is my favorite movie, I guarantee someone's going to say, I hate that movie. The people that made that movie don't take offense when someone says, I hate your movie. It's okay, whatever. Brush it off, keep going. If you love what you're doing and want to make good content, keep making good content. If it's good in your mind, Hopefully you'll find someone else that thinks the same way as you do, and hopefully an audience will grow out of that. So at least that's the idea. Keep passionate, keep making, and until next time, peace.